Hi, I'm David Millington. I'm one of the product managers here at Embarcadero. And today I want to introduce a new plugin that we've added to Delphi. It's available right now in GetIt, our package manager. It's a low-code wizard, and it's a way to easily create a cross-platform application, fast, fully functional application with Delphi and FireMonkey. First, let's go over what we're going to cover today. First, I want to go over what low-code is. Then we'll look at the wizard itself, both installing it from GetIt and using the wizard to create the low-code application. After that, we're going to have a look at the generated application itself, what it does, the various screens it has, the way it works, and so forth. I also want to look at the design practices that are in the generated application and look at extending the low-code app. When you've generated this app, you most likely want to modify it and tweak it and extend its behavior to suit your needs. So we'll have a quick look at how to do that by looking at adding a new screen. And finally, we'll summarize all this just by examining and covering generating low-code applications with Delphi as a whole. So you may wonder, what is low-code? Or perhaps another way of phrasing it is, why have we created a low-code application wizard? And the answer to that is really that low-code addresses the same problem that Delphi itself addresses, and that is easily creating software. Software is key to today's world. The world today runs on software in every aspect. But software can be difficult to create. So low-code is programming, developing an application, creating its behavior and its function without much coding itself, as in writing code in text. And this is often visual. Sometimes it could be sort of connecting components together visually, or sometimes there's low-code software that is highly targeted to creating one or two specific types of applications. And for those particular applications, you'll have a dashboard, for example, or some other sort of configuration panes that you can enter the settings for your required behavior and will then generate an application that works for you. Lancer actually is an excellent low-code environment, and it's owned by IDEA as well, and you can check that out at lancer.com. But in general, low-code programming is, I think, best summarized as usually visually connecting sets of pre-built behavior together with a bit of configuration, sometimes a few lines of code, but not much. Taking advantage of pre-existing and pre-written libraries, existing behavior that an application tools vendor like us provides for you, so that you can create an application quickly without having to write a lot of code. And in this sense, the RAD approach, RAD stands for Rapid Application Development, and Delphi itself are low-code. Delphi always has been very focused on what we call component-based development. Components can be both visual controls, and these are things that you place on a form or frame, which are what become a window or a screen when you run your application. Or what we just call plain components, and these are packaged sets of functionality. And you can place components visually in Delphi, connect them to each other, configure them through various settings, and get a vast amount of your application's behavior configured and working without writing any code. It's important, though, that your application is extensible. That means that low code is not no code. There is usually a small amount of code, and what's important is that in order to be extensible, that you can write code if and when you need to, and you will need to eventually. The reason is that as your application grows, its complexity and behavior will grow as well. And so you need to use technology that is configurable and extensible in any way, and usually a way that you can't predict ahead of time. And the way to handle that will be writing code at some point. And this is why low code is a very important approach to solving your business problem. Because not only does it mean you can get started quickly, but it means that as your business requirements grow and change, you remain able to address those. You don't want to use a technology where at some point you just hit a hard limit and you can't do what you need to do. It's important to use a technology that can be extended however you need. And Delphi is fantastic here, both because of the visual components, the pre-existing bits of functionality that you can easily hook together, but also because if and when you need to, you can also extend your app with code and write and develop it as much as your solution needs. So what about the low-code app wizard for Delphi? Well, as we just covered, Delphi uses component-based development, largely visual, easy to connect, and it's great for low code, for building applications quickly. But until recently in Delphi, creating an application was still fairly manual. I mean, you would create a new application and it would give you a new blank form, where a form is something that becomes a window or a screen in your application. And you had to add components yourself and hook them together yourself and so forth. In other words, create the even with low code, create the application from scratch. And now this wizard goes a lot further than that. It creates an application for you. As functional, you can run it straight away. It has a settings page, for example, and the settings work. And demonstrates a lot of best practices, such as testing. So the wizard really moves Delphi from being low code in approach to really helping you get up to speed very, very quickly by creating an application with many screens, suiting common purposes in an application for you. And from there you can go on and extend as you need. So it's fully configurable because the wizard has lots of options. Comes with a bunch of common screens that you might have in your application. I mentioned a setting page earlier. It has a context screen, it has a user profile, and so forth. Basically, the idea is that a lot of things that you might want to do in any normal application will create the framework for you. It even comes with an optional integrated database and a data layer if your application is one that needs to store and handle data. So you can run the wizards, configure what screens and what data you want to have in your application, and then it will just generate the application for you. And the generated application has all the components and all the user interface and so forth already created and connected. And from there you can just extend it and configure it as you wish. It's very easy to use. You can find it in our GetIt package manager. That's in the tools menu. Open GetIt, and then in the IDE plugins section you choose FireMonkey app low code wizard. Once it's installed, you go to the file new menu. There's another option that opens a dialog, and then you can choose FireMonkey template app. And we're actually planning to rename that to say low code wizard, which I think is a clearer name. So by the time you watch this webinar, it may simply be low code wizard. I briefly mentioned this in a previous slide, but the application contains a number of common screens, and these are functional or have hooks to set up as you need. And some highlights of those are a settings screen, which contains an example of several different types of settings, such as a text setting or a toggle setting. It also shows how to change the theme, so the application that's generated can just follow the platform's light or dark theme, or you can specify to override that to use light or dark theme. There are a couple of screens to do with authentication, logging into a server, signing up and logging in, and we actually recommend RAD server for that. But if you want to implement that, there are hooks you can add your own authentication. There's a user profile screen that lets you add photos, set your name, and so forth. Contacts screen that accesses the device contacts, and you can add a database with local data. The generated app, when you choose this option, includes a database with just some sample data. Of course, you can modify and extend that as you wish. So having gone over that, let's actually use the wizard and see how it works and what it produces. So this is the FireMonkey low-code app wizard that generates an application for you. And it has a couple of pages, a few interesting settings. Here on the first page, we just need to give a project a name. I'm going to call it demo app, and a location where the application will be generated to on disk. Just place that on my desktop. You can also choose whether or not you want a data layer generated in the application. Now, for the sake of this demo, I'm going to turn that off. I don't want a database in the generated app. But of course, if you do need a database, that will use Interbase and will have sample database with some sample data. Click Next, and this is the key page in the application wizard. This page shows you all the different screens that can be generated by the wizard and will be in the generated app. 3 different areas. One's to do with user accounts, so you can sign up, sign in, or see a user profile. The general common application screens, settings page, terms of use, privacy policy, and about, they're all very common. Plus an app homepage. Now, all cross-platform applications tend to have a home screen. So you can see this one is checked but disabled because the wizard will always create one for you. The home screen in the generated app is fairly simple, just shows a bit of data, a bit of information about the app. Because of course, in every application, you'll want to customize that and make it look like something different. Finally, there's an additional section which has a few other screens. You can have a contacts screen that will access the contacts on your device. If you included a database on the previous screen, then you'll have a screen here that allows you to show some data from that database. And there's an example new empty screen. Now, this has provided an example for how to add pages. I'll leave that checked for this demo, but later I'm actually going to show how to extend the app completely from scratch. So click Next to show us a summary of the settings. Click Finish and it will create. Now, before we look at the application itself, I just want to quickly go over some of the ways the generated app is designed. Each screen is a frame. That's a term that Delphi developers will have heard before, but a frame is a dedicated visual UI container. That's useful because it keeps functionality carefully separated. So you create a frame and that becomes a screen, an individual screen with particular functionality. If you happen to add a database, then the data access uses a model view layer. And finally, the application comes with some unit tests. Unit tests are code that you write to test your application. This helps you maintain the quality as you extend and develop your app because you're basically testing that the behavior that you expect is the behavior that you get. We can also test some of the UI behavior as well through these unit tests, and I'll show that soon. So with all this in mind, let's go have a look at the application itself. So here we are with the new application. Now what's open right now is the main view that is basically a container for all of the different screens, and because of that it doesn't really contain very much. You can see here on the right hand side in the projects page that there's actually quite a lot generated. There's a view dot something, and each of the dot somethings is a different screen. So we could look, for example, at let's say view.privacy policy, and you can see here this is an example of a screen. It contains a heading, it contains a back button, and it contains here some text that you would configure for your application's privacy policy. So let's actually run the application and see how it looks. So here's the application as it appears when you run. Now I'm running here on Windows. One of the nice things about Delphi is that when you have a cross-platform application, but with FireMonkey you can target it for any supported platform. Now this application is meant for mobile, iOS or Android, and normally running and debugging on an app can take a few steps. One of the nice things with Delphi here is that I can just run it on Windows directly. That means that you can change and modify things and test them very quickly. You can iterate very quickly rather than having to go through the hassle of actually connecting to a device or so forth. You need to do that very rarely. So here's the application as it looks on startup. It has a logo which you can replace, and you can log in, and there are hooks here for you to replace authentication here with whatever you want. Here I'm just going to leave these blank, so I'll sign in. And we get the application home screen. Now the most interesting thing here is the hamburger menu here. Here you can see all of the screens that we've generated. The user profile, the contacts, the settings, about, the new blank form, and so forth. And this is one of the neat bits of the architecture. So I can look at, for example, the profile. I can set a profile picture. I can enter my email and other personal details, or sign out. Something else I could do is look at the settings. So here you can see that we have a theme setting. I can choose the light or the dark theme. Let's choose the dark theme to see how that looks. Or if this is running on a device, then there's a third option, which is to use the device's theme. The rest of the settings page shows a couple of example settings, which are there so that you can basically copy how they work. So time zone, a string of text of some sort, and a toggle Boolean setting. And there are a number of other screens as well, but I think those are the two most interesting. Rather than going through the whole thing in detail, I actually recommend that you download and install the wizard and try it out. What I want to demo, as well as demoing how to extend this, actually are the unit tests and some of the architecture. So let's have a quick look at that. So here we are with the application's privacy policy, which is one of the views that I opened earlier. Now, as you can see, most of this is just designed visually. For those who are already familiar with Delphi, this will be nothing new, but for those who aren't, you can just design in this area here, and then you can access various properties through the Object Inspector here. So here I have selected the text, and I can change various attributes about it. In terms of code, there's very little. Of course, you can add as much code as you wish. The key item here, though, is in the initialization and finalization. This occurs when the app starts up or when the app shuts down. And you can see that the frame or screen here is registered when the application starts up and unregistered when the application closes down. Now let's have a look at the unit tests. It's important to test an application, and we have a fairly minimal set of unit tests here that you can expand. Now, unit test basically just runs some code and checks that what you expect to happen really happened. I won't go into the details here, but we can see a few things here, such as setting the username. Now, it calls some code to set the username, and then after that checks that the username is actually what it tried to set it to. This might sound tautological, but really that's the point. When something that you expect to work in a certain way breaks, then checks like this will catch it. So it's interesting to browse through these, I think, have a look at some of the things that are tested. One particular thing that I think is interesting is that we have tests here for the orientation. Now, of course, on a mobile device like iOS or Android, you can rotate. The app and the application should rotate to match the screen orientation. So we can test that by actually manually invoking the screen orientation here to landscape, which is the wide view. And the rest of the code here checks that the right thing has happened when the orientation changes. This is a great example of using user tests for something that is normally only tested in UI or manually tested. This is the kind of thing that you want to always work, but that you might have QA staff checking every time. When you have a unit test here, which is simply code that runs. You just build and run this application to test it. You will mimic what happens in the application itself and verify that the right thing happens. So let's see how we can extend the application. I'm going to add a brand new screen, and I'll actually go over most of the content on this slide actually while editing the screen. But to tell you what to expect, what to keep an eye out for, I'm going to create a new frame. I'm going to register that frame. I'm going to add it to the list of activities, where activity is something that's shown in the hamburger menu. And that's about it. It's really not very complex. Something else that you might want to consider extending is the login registration to connect to your own server. We also have RAD server here, which is a lightweight way to provide server-side applications. You normally communicate via REST, and so you could potentially use that to authenticate via our REST components. Again, these are your visual components that you drop onto a frame. You can avoid writing code or even configuring those REST components completely by using the REST debugger. That will both create the components and configure them for you, and then you can just copy and paste them into your application. So here we are back with the application. I'm going to show how to add a new screen from scratch. So if you right-click the demo app, I can add a new item of some form. Rather than just directly adding something normal, I'm going to add an inheritable item. And I can inherit from all the frames that have been added already, but the way to do it is just to inherit from the main frame. And that gives me this. This is a frame that's already set up with a content area, a caption, and a button to go back. Now, I'm going to give this a name. So if I click here in the structure view on main frame, I can scroll down the object inspector to the name property. I'm going to call it the webinar frame, like so. The next thing I have to do is one of the few bits of code. I'm going to copy from the privacy policy the initialization and finalization that registers the frame. So I'm just going to paste that here just before the end. And this is not the privacy policy frame, it is the webinar frame. So we're almost done. The application will now know about this class. What we want to do is to get it into the hamburger menu. We have a file here with a whole bunch of constants. This is just a text unit that you can edit. What we have here is what's called a list of activities. And activities are all the screens that you actually want to show in the hamburger menu. The reason for this is that you may want at some point to have a screen that doesn't show directly in the hamburger menu, a subscreen of the screen. So this one lists all the ones that we actually want to be in the menu. So I'll scroll up and I can see these names here. I'm just going to again copy one of these. So I'm going to call it the activity webinar. It's called webinar, and add it to the array of activities. The final thing I need to do is change the number of activities here. Control clicking there to navigate. That's almost it. I do want to change a few things here. I think I'm going to add some UI here. So I'm going to click the caption. You can see it's selected in the structure view and change its text. Currently this is called caption. I'm going to make sure it says webinar. The hamburger menu will pick up the name automatically from the name of the frame, but we need to edit this one manually. And I'm going to add a new label. I'm going to change its alignment so it takes up, we call it client, takes up the entire space available to it. I'm going to change some settings of how that renders as well. So here in the text settings, I can change the horizontal alignment to be centered. I'm going to make the font size 20. Let's make it a bit bigger. Let's say 30. Change the color to say cornflower blue seems pleasant. And change the text to say hello webinar. So what I've done is I have just created a frame that inherits from the main frame, that inherits a bunch of behavior that you don't need to worry about coding. And I have also registered it and added it to the list of activities that will be shown in the main menu. And that's it. Let's just run this. Here we have the application again. You can see that it's remembered the settings because it starts in dark theme now. And if I click the hamburger menu, you will see that I now have a new webinar item at the bottom of the menu. If I click that, you will see the new screen, Hello Webinar. That's an overview of the low-code app wizard and the application that the wizard generates for you. It's important to remember with low-code that low-code is not no-code, it's not zero-code. There are many low-code approaches. Delphi has always been low-code through its RAD approach. You add components, either visual components like a button or a non-visual component, just something that packages up functionality, but that you still see visually on screen, and you connect them together. It's important to be able to extend your application, and Delphi lets you do that. With this particular app, has a bit of code written behind it that you don't need to worry about, provide some of the functionality. And you can extend this or add your own code as you wish. I think the key is that it's very easy to get started by having an application here that is basically fully functional already and that you can modify and extend as you wish. And it shows a few interesting architectural practices, such as the frame registration or having unit tests. We hope you will find it interesting and worthwhile and a good way to get started with an app quickly. It is in GetIt right now, so you can install it, run Delphi, go to the Tools menu, get a Package Manager, and then the IDE plugins section, and select the FireMonkey app wizard and install it. And then in the File menu, just go to File, New, Other, and either in Delphi or in Delphi multi-device, click Low-Code App Wizard, and it's done. Thanks for watching. We'll move on to questions and answers now, and I hope you will find the wizard very useful. All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending. I can see a lot of people online, so obviously this wizard has produced a lot of interest. I'm joined today by Glenn Dufke. Glenn, actually, I think it's the first time I've pronounced your name, so I hope I pronounced it correctly.
You did, yes.
Fantastic, thanks. Glenn is one of our MVPs and is quite interested in the wizard, so he's joined us to answer the questions and discuss the wizard and anything you would like to know about it. I can see a lot of questions have come in, but please keep them coming in because we will stay here and keep on answering questions for as long as you have questions for us. So let's begin. I'm just scrolling through the question log here. Starting at the top, there's a question about whether the wizard can be called from the command line interface. Currently, it's a plugin for the IDE, for the Delphi IDE, so it only runs from within the IDE. Really, there's no reason, though, that it would have to be that way. And in fact, I mean, all it does is generate an application based on some questions. So it could potentially be extended to be a command line app as well.
Yes, that's something I think would be very handy to being able to automatically generate your application templates through the command line.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. It wasn't part of the use case that we that we scoped up when we decided the scope for the wizard. But if people are interested in that, then that's definitely the kind of thing we can consider extending it to do. There's a question here as well about what versions it's available for. So the answer there is for Delphi 10.4.2, which is the current version of Delphi that's publicly available. And there's a later question about whether it's available for Community Edition. Now, Community Edition is currently on an older version of Delphi. At some point, that will be updated, and when Community gets to 10.4.2 or newer, then it would be available for Community Edition as well. but not yet for community.
Another question here, I actually think here is also very interesting, is about the unit testing part. Since we are actually unit testing a UI, and I thought that it normally you only would unit test the program logic.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I have to admit I was the same. I mean, in the past, I have written unit tests, and I briefly covered this in the webinar, but and many people are probably already familiar with this, but a unit test is basically writing some code that checks other code. Checks that something does what you expect it to do. And so I initially always wrote code just to check logic. I always thought you couldn't really test a user interface with a unit test. Internally in Embarcadero, we do have unit tests, and we have a lot of tests, and we have UE tests as well, but we also have unit tests for our UE as well. And at the time, that was new to me. And while you can't easily test something like let's say a button, you're looking how it should, because you need a UE testing tool to do that. A lot of UE is about behavior, and you can definitely unit test behavior.
Indeed, indeed.
Actually, I can see a related question here, Glenn, which is why have code for unit tests, but why have code in a low-code app? I don't know if that's one you might want to answer.
Yeah, I mean, some would say the big question why, but honestly, I think by including the unit tests, we can actually have a much more predictable behavior of the application, and also encourage us to test much more. And with the low-code app here is actually to do the heavy lifting of normally when we have had to design everything ourselves. We can quickly get off the start and produce an application, and having everything ready, including the unit test. I think it's very handy. So yeah, that's I think that it's a very good thing to have the unit test included even in a low-code app.
Yeah, we actually run surveys of our customers every year, and if you're on this webinar and you're an existing customer, you've probably got an email in the past asking you to fill out a survey. And we find that a lot of people do use unit tests, but a surprising amount don't. And so adding tests here is just sort of a way to sort of encourage that by having them there right from the start when you use this template.
Yes, I mean, honestly, it's something I noticed myself, that unit test has been often an afterthought, and once you started writing your application, it's like something you usually tend to always put in the back of your mind. I need to write the unit test, but I'll do it tomorrow. And you at some point you never get the unit test written. So yeah, having them from the start is definitely a good starting point.
Yeah, it's quite true. Unit tests like documentation. We all know that we need to do it, but we don't always.
See here.
So a question about C++ Builder, actually, which I'll answer. Is this wizard available for C++ Builder? The answer is not yet. It generates a Delphi application, but it can certainly be extended. So this, you're probably picking up here with some of the questions about ways it could be extended. This is sort of version 1. We're definitely open to extending it and making it more powerful in various ways. And adding a C++ version is definitely on the table.
I think that would be very handy too. Indeed.
Actually, Glenn, here's a good question that I might hand over to you to answer. Well, first of all, there's a comment which is really nice. This is really cool and makes Delphi even more productive than it already is. So thanks. That's great to hear. The comment goes on to say it also helps developers with a good set of standards for how best to build apps, and thanks for that. Now that's true, and we definitely wanted to encourage good practices, such as having a unit test project from the beginning. When I was making this webinar and using the app, though, I did notice some things that I think I would do differently, or that I think we should change inside the generated app. So I wouldn't take it as like 100%, this is absolutely the best, because I think we'll go and update and change things. And Glenn, I know that you've had a close look at the app, the wizard in the app as well, and is there anything there that struck you about the architecture or changes that are both either good things that you want to point out as interesting architecture, or things that that you think we should change and update?
I would say there's both a lot of good things about the low-code wizard, and there are also some things that I personally want to change, which I don't think is as good. But I mean, it's a first release, so there will be bugs and other things you discover that might you want to fix. But I think the key point here with the wizard is to encourage best practices when you're developing for mobile. And one thing I noticed when designing for mobile is that we cannot think the same way as we do in VCL. Since we work with the mobile platform, and both iOS and Android, they behave differently. So we need to be much more aware of keeping as much of our logic away from the main thread, the main UI thread, and try to make sure the app is responsive. And in this low-code template, there is a lot of focus on using threads, and also using the parallel programming library to offload many of these tasks and ensure that our generated app is actually responsive and gives a great user experience. And that's the interesting thing with this low-code app, that we can harness input from all the developers and make it even better. And I think that it's a very good idea.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions coming in asking us to extend it in various ways, and I think we'll likely do that, but we'll also sort of revise the code. I think the people that we asked to develop it, did a good job there, and we'll keep on revising that. There's a question here about what do I mean by registering a frame, and related, there's a question about I showed writing code to add to a menu, and on the screen had I think this could be done differently. So what could be done? So those I think are sort of two related questions. What is registration, and how might you do that differently? Do you want to answer that, Glenn, or shall I?
If you could answer it, please.
Sure. So registering a frame is the application that is generated has a lot of functionality already written for you. And part of that is the application knowing about what screens are available and being able to put them in the menu and so forth. And so registering the frame is the code that I showed that runs when the application starts up and shuts down, and basically just says, okay, this screen exists, keep track of it internally so that you can display it or hide it. Now, I went on in that demo to show adding my new screen on the hamburger menu, and I had to edit some code to do that. And I think we might revise it so that we don't need to do that, because registration could include a flag there just to say, the screen that the application knows is available and can show or hide should or should not be included in the hamburger menu, and that's what I would do differently, and maybe something that will update it, version 2 of the wizard.
Yes. And there is also a question here that I think is interesting here, that if we would be able to actually create like a template package. So if we, as individual developers want to share our own template, if we will be able to do that.
Yeah, that's a good question as well. And actually, there's several questions like that, all asking about expanding with different templates. There's a question or several questions about adding VCL templates for Windows and so forth. And I think that would be really good. I think it'd be a fantastic direction to take the wizard, to have a number of templates that can work from.
Yes.
Let's see, there's another question here. Actually, there's another question about what other things might be, let's see, might be done differently. Although I think you already answered that, Glenn. But if you want to discuss any of the other code that you've seen, were there any architectural things that really stood out to you, like specific ways the app was designed?
I think probably the most clever way, I would say, is the emphasis on the MVVM architecture. Basically, the model view and view model approach to actually separating your data layer and your application logic from the UI, and actually taking advantage of using the initialization and finalization sections of the frames to automatically plug it into to the application and dynamically extend it. So and there is a lot of different bits in the low code wizard that I think is very well thought out.
There's a question here: how are the transitions from one frame to the next managed? So I guess that means when using the menu to show a frame, how is that done? Now I actually have to go look in the code to answer that one. I just suppose you know off the top of your head, Glenn?
It's basically when you're just setting the frame, the frame you want to plug in, you set it into a layout, and again the smart thing about FireMonkey is that you can actually apply animations if you want to. You can also, if you really want to be fancy, you can also go so far and use third-party components to manage your frames in terms of applying different animations. There is some open source components. So you have multiple options to handle the transition. So yeah, that's it's flexible, and you're not locked into a specific way of handling the animations. Yeah. Let's see.
So a few questions that I was just typing answers to while you were speaking. Let's see. It's a question about recordings for the webinar, and yes, a recording will be made available later. We put everything up on YouTube. There's a question about whether we could use any other database with it. Currently uses Interbase.
Yes, I saw that question too, and you have the option to use a different database if you really want to. I mean, the project is using FireDAC, so you're free to use a different database. Of course, Interbase is a very flexible and compact database that have a lot of great features. Hence why we have used here in the wizard. But it's not like you are can only use one database.
Yeah, I think SQLite, for example, would probably make quite a nice database that you could use.
Yes.
The nice thing about FireDAC is it supports, I think it's 17 different databases, so you can use whatever you want, really. Since the app is, sort of generates an app for you, we've made choices about what it uses. Interbase is very good for mobile apps because it's very lightweight, but you can use whatever you want.
Yes, I mean it's actually worth to mention about the Interbase part is that Interbase to go is, as far as I am aware, the only other third-party database that has been licensed or approved by Apple to be used on their on iOS. And given that Interbase supports advanced features, including encryption, it makes it very attractive to use for storing user credentials and other information you don't want to be able to expose.
So I was just looking up the answer to the question earlier about how the transitions from one frame to the next are managed. I couldn't remember the name of the component that he uses, so I had to go have a look. It uses TET multiview. I just put a link to that in the chat. Now, T multiview is a really nice component that has support for multiple panes or drawers. It also allows you to have things like on a narrow device like a mobile phone, you can have a hamburger menu and it'll just show a screen at a time. But if you then put that in landscape mode, or you have a bigger screen like a tablet, for example, it will show both the menu and the frames at the same time. It's a very, very flexible, very powerful component. So
yes.
That's the answer there, T multiview. There's a question if Delphi supports dynamic packages for any platform other than Windows. It does. So that would be Linux and Mac OS. We don't support dynamic packages on iOS or Android from memory. I'll have to double check that. But I believe we don't for various reasons of restrictions on the platform itself. But on the server or desktop platforms, yes, we support dynamic packages. I'll just write in an answer to that.
There's also a question here. How do you manage the bindings between UI controls and the database in a model view way? Do you use light bindings or any other way? There is, in fact, being used light bindings here in the template. And live bindings is, of course, a great way to save yourself from writing code and quickly bind your data to the UI. Let's see here. Also, another question here that it would be nice to have a good chat screen template. I agree. That would be very handy to have a chat template. That would, of course, require a little more work to make, but at least it would give a lot of options too.
And there's a note here about where it's located. So if you go to the file menu, new other, then it shows a dialog. Currently it's located in the Delphi multi-device category, but we plan to update that. In fact, we have a new build internally, which I'd hoped was going to be out by the time of this webinar, but build's taking a little longer than expected. That will update the name of the wizard, so we'll actually use the term low code in the file menu dialog. We'll actually just put it in the Delphi category as well as the Delphi multi-device category. But thanks, Anne-Marie, for noting where it's located. This question about learning best practices on Community Edition, I guess because this wizard isn't available for Community yet until we update Community. Glenn, what would you recommend for learning best practices for Delphi on mobile?
I think it's a good idea to start with the official documentation in terms of design language. For instance, Google has their material design guidelines in terms of the UI, and they also have some guidelines in terms of how to structure your application, and those features can be applied when we are developing in Delphi too. I think that's one of the most common mistakes I see other developers do with mobile applications is that they try to think Windows and VCL on a mobile device, and both in designing the UI, but also the way they're interacting with their logic. That is it requires you understand the platform you're targeting. And of course, there's also here, as David pointed out here, there are some good books from Andrea Mani. He recently published a book about FireMonkey GUI programming, and Danielle Teddy also have written a book some time ago, which covers a lot of elements in terms of developing for mobile. So it's basically read about the target platform and try and understand what's going on the mobile device. Of course, we have a lot of resources available on the mobile device today, but the phone itself and the OS is still different from a normal Windows application.
Yeah, I think you have a really good point there, Glenn, about understanding the platform. And you said something along the lines of that many developers may approach mobile as though it was VCL and Windows, which is an excellent point. And I put some links in just while you're answering, because I know there are some good books and resources out there that I just wanted to have a minute to look up. So yeah, I linked to two, which are, as you mentioned, Danielle Tetty's Delphi cookbook. I really like this book because the idea of a cookbook is it just provides a bunch of recipes, as in like a few pages, just give an example for how to do a particular thing. And so it has a few dozen specific things that you probably want to do, and then tells you how to achieve that particular thing, which is a really nice approach. Then there was also, yeah, as you mentioned, Glenn, Andrea Magni wrote one called Delphi GUI Programming with FireMonkey, which is also a great book. And I think the recipe approach sort of shows you just how to achieve something particular, but the book on FireMonkey itself is probably a good resource for learning the style of how to write for FireMonkey and how to write for mobile.
Yeah, and I would also say that probably the most challenging part writing for mobile is it's a moving target. That we have over time seen Google, especially, changing the way the OS looks and what they expect you as the developer to adhere to when you're designing the application. And as some might already have seen, with the announcement of Android 12, Google has again introduced new elements of and approaches to design and organize your UI. So yeah, it's trying to stay up to date with how the platform is moving.
There's a question here if the MVC architecture used is based on a particular framework, and it isn't. It's just written following the general model of having views and logic separated and so forth. But there are some good MVC frameworks available for Delphi. The only reason we didn't use them is because we want this to be standalone rather than having dependencies.
Yeah, and I would also like to mention here that since the template is based around separating the UI from the application logic, the application logic itself can actually be even more contained in the sense that you can use it in VCL applications. So you basically can use the same program logic both in a FireMonkey and a VCL application, and the only major difference is that on the UI side is one part you're using VCL and the other part you're using FireMonkey. So that is a very interesting aspect here, that you can reuse a lot of the code between the platforms and frameworks, and take full advantage of both, the VCL framework and FireMonkey when you're targeting all the other platforms supported, which I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Some more suggestions coming in about ways we could extend the application that's been built. I think it's really good actually to see so many suggestions about how to extend it, and I think it's very clear that we need to keep working on this just to add everything that everyone is asking for in the chat. The one that prompted this actually is that I just read a comment saying it'd be nice to extend the main menu with sub-items. You can sort of expand or collapse categories. And yeah, I mean, that's certainly doable. And we could certainly extend the application to show you how to do that as well.
Yes. And I think that's also, very interesting, that being able to further extend the template. And that also leads up to a question here, that if there are a way developers can submit like a custom T mainframe. And I think here that wouldn't it be easiest if they reach out to you directly, David?
Sure. In terms of submitting codes, it can be tricky because legally we can't always look at code. One thing we've been looking at is how to open this up. We have an MVP program for many developers. MVPs are Delphi developers that advocate for Delphi. Write blogs and produce content and stuff. And we're certainly thinking it'd be possible to open the code to them so that they can contribute. I'd like to make it open source, but the problem is there are always many complications doing that you may not be aware of. I think if you have ideas or you want to submit code, then yeah, drop me an email. It's just david.millington@embarcadero.com. I'm not sure for everyone else, but for some reason the screen has gone black. I can't see the last frame with contact info anymore. But yeah, david.millington@embarcadero.com, and yeah, we can discuss and see what's possible.
All right.
Let's see, a lot of questions here to scroll through. There's more suggestions of screens we could add, such as a splash screen or a sort of welcome page. What's new, things like that. Those are all excellent ideas.
Yeah, I mean that's the great thing about this template here, is that it's very easy to extend. And yeah, again, I mean, always submit ideas. I know David is always open for ideas, or and I think that's it's a great way to expand on this concept.
There's a question here saying, I missed how to create a new frame. Can you please explain it again, especially the wizard part of adding it to the project? So I think the best answer there is actually that we will make this recording available for replay. So it doesn't matter if you missed some of it. We'll put it up on YouTube and you can watch it again. But very briefly, what I did was just add, well, in the project, right-click and go add new. But rather than just creating something blank, I chose to inherit from an existing unit, and so I chose to inherit from the main frame. The main frame is effectively just sort of a frame that has a bunch of functionality built in already, and yeah, so that was what I did, how I added a frame. See, there are a few questions here which I should probably answer about Delphi itself, such as when 10.5 is coming out and when the next update to Community Edition will be. So for Community Edition, we can't share anything at the moment, I'm afraid. We definitely do plan to update it to a newer version. I'm not sure exactly when. In terms of the next version of Delphi itself, 10.5, that's being actively worked on right now. We can't announce a release date, but if you have update subscription for Delphi, then at some point you will get an invitation to join the beta program when that becomes available. And I expect that the beta program actually to open up to active update subscription customers pretty soon. Don't quote me on a particular timeline that might be by the end of this month, for example, but we might open the beta program to update subscription customers. But for all that, I can't share exactly when 10.5 will come out yet. We do have a planned release date, but that's still internal and subject to change. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that more precisely. Glenn, are there more questions that you've seen that you'd like to answer?
I think we have been I think we actually been through the most of the questions here. There's actually been a lot of great questions here, and thank you to everyone who has been chiming in with all these questions. It's great to see all this engagement.
Yeah, I really agree there. We have many pages of questions and suggestions and so forth. It's fantastic to see. If we have missed any questions, it's very possible simply due to the volume. Then please feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer. Pardon me. As I mentioned, my email is david.millington@embarcadero.com, and that's actually in the Q&A log as well. But Glenn, unless you see something else come in, I think we can probably...
There's one question here that just came in here. The answer bar says that 10.4 Pro is only for local database use. Does this mean we can use it to create network applications for databases? The database part here is for local storage in the application itself. That could, for instance, be user settings or logging information locally. But there is nothing in the way of you plugging in a T-REST client and using a REST service to create your network application. So if you have an existing REST service running, you can log in that way. So I mean, you're not limited to the enterprise or architect versions only. Of course, it will require a bit more work, but it's doable.
Sure, thanks. I'm just going to write in a comment here with a link to the different editions that we have. In general, for answering questions about what's included with a particular license or so forth, I think the best answer I can give is that is explained in the license or on the webpage. I prefer to sort of direct you to that rather than trying to reinterpret it and explain it and maybe make a mistake or be confusing or something while doing that. Also, you can just contact the sales team and they'll explain to you what edition you need for any particular use case.
Yeah, that's. I think that's all the questions we have here for today.
All right. Yeah, I can see a couple of technical questions come in, such as see converting a camera picture to a string via certain encoding without blocking the main thread. it's hard to say exactly the best way to do that, but you would probably just want to put that in another thread or use a task via the parallel programming library to do that. So you would take the camera picture as a bitmap, give it to a task, and that task would actually do the conversion. But yeah, I think that's the only technical question I spotted. So yeah, Glenn, I think that's it.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us as well, by the way. And I know you've poked around with Wizard a lot, and you're very keen to contribute and make some changes yourself. So thank you for that. It's been really good to have you join us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Well, I certainly appreciated your help answering questions as well. And thank you to everyone who was attending. We had a lot of attendees actually, and a lot of questions. It's really great to see all the interest. The replay will be made available later. Thanks again, and hope you find the wizard interesting and useful.